The words hit the assembled ranch hands like a bolt of summer lightning, and not a single man among them dared to breathe. Patrick Maddox stood at the head of the long wooden table in the bunkhouse, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe behind him, his dark eyes sweeping the faces of every cowherd, wrangler, cook, and fence mender who worked the Maddox spread. The lantern light carved deep shadows across his jaw, and when he spoke, his voice was low and absolutely certain, the kind of voice that had once stopped a cattle stampede cold just by the sheer force of its authority. "She has my name now," he said, "and every problem of hers becomes mine, every debt, every threat, every enemy she carried into this valley. You work for me, which means you work for her. Any man who treats her as anything less than the mistress of this ranch can clear his bunk before sundown." Silence stretched across the room like a rope pulled taut. Hector Vance, the oldest wrangler on the payroll, a man who had ridden with Patrick's father before the war and who had seen 3 foremen come and go, turned his weathered hat slowly in his hands. His eyes flicked toward the closed door of the main house, where Lillian Holloway, Lillian Maddox now, stood alone on the other side. Alone, and terrified that the man who had just claimed her in front of God and a traveling circuit preacher was going to regret it before the ink on the register was dry. Because the truth was, this marriage had not been born from romance. It had been born from desperation, from secrets, from a dark past that had followed Lillian out of Kansas like a shadow with teeth. And Patrick Maddox, for all his ferocity and certainty, did not yet know the full weight of what he had just claimed. That terrifying reckoning was only 3 days away. But to understand how Patrick Maddox came to stand in that bunkhouse and make the most defining declaration of his life, you have to go back 6 weeks. To the morning a woman arrived in Caldwell, Texas on a stolen horse with a bullet graze along her left forearm, and nothing but a carpetbag, and a lie she had been rehearsing all the way from Wichita. The year was 1882. The cattle drives that had made fortunes for men like Patrick's father were beginning to slow as the railroads carved deeper into the open range, but Caldwell sat in a sweet pocket of the Edwards Plateau country, where grass still ran thick and water still ran clear, and the Maddox Ranch, some 12,000 acres of it, remained one of the most prosperous operations in that part of Texas. The town itself was small but not fragile, the kind of place that had a mercantile, a livery, a doctor who doubled as a dentist, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and a saloon that the respectable women of the community pretended did not exist. It was in front of the mercantile that Lillian Holloway's borrowed horse chose to stop, as if the animal had made its own decision that this was far enough. Lillian climbed down with careful, controlled movements, because her arm hurt badly, and she absolutely could not afford to show it. She was 26 years old, dark-haired, with sharp green eyes that had learned to look calm when every instinct in her body was screaming. She was not fragile by nature and had not been raised to be. She had been raised in a Kansas farming family that had worked hard and died young, and by the time she was 20, she had buried her mother, her father, and her younger brother to a fever that swept through their county in the summer of 1876. What came after the years in Wichita? Those were the years she did not volunteer information about. She tied the horse to the rail, tucked her arm against her side, and walked into the mercantile with her chin level and her eyes forward. The woman behind the counter was round-faced and kind-eyed, with gray threading through her brown hair. Her name, as a hand-painted sign on the wall announced, was Mrs. Clara Briggs, proprietress. "Morning," Lillian said. "I am looking for work." Clara Briggs looked her over with the practiced assessment of a woman who had seen trouble walk through her door before and had learned to tell the difference between the kind that brought danger and the kind that was simply running from it. Whatever she saw in Lillian's face seemed to satisfy her on the second count. "What kind of work?" Clara asked. "Any honest kind," Lillian said. "I can keep accounts, I can sew, I can cook. I have some experience with ledgers." "Ledgers," Clara repeated, and her eyes lit with something practical. "Can you do sums without a counting frame?" "Yes." Then you might be someone worth talking to. My daughter-in-law was helping me with the books before she had her baby, and she is not likely to be back behind this counter anytime soon. Clara came around from behind the counter and extended her hand. Clara Briggs, Lillian Holloway. The handshake was firm on both sides. That arm, Clara said, because she had noticed it from the beginning and was apparently not the kind of woman who ignored things. Dr. Prentice is 3 doors down. I am fine, Lillian said. You are not fine, Clara said, not unkindly, but I will not press you. Come back this afternoon and I will show you the ledgers. If your work is good, you can start Monday. It was a Thursday. Lillian used the intervening hours to find the cheapest room available at the boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Garrett. To clean and bandage her arm as best she could with supplies, she purchased quietly at the mercantile. And to sit on the edge of her rented cot and breathe through the shaking that she had been holding back for 2 days of hard riding. She had made it. She was not sure this was safe, but she had made it here, and that was one problem solved out of the several that were still very much alive behind her. She did not know yet that the most significant problem and the most significant man was going to walk into Clara Briggs's mercantile on the following Monday morning, and that his name was going to permanently replace hers within 6 weeks. Patrick Maddox came into town twice a week, regular as rainfall when it was not drought season. He came for supplies for mail, and because his foreman Hector Vance had told him approximately 14 years ago that a man who never left his own land started to see it as the whole world, which was a dangerous kind of blindness. Patrick had never forgotten that. He was 32 years old, built lean and powerful the way men who work outdoors from childhood tend to build, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in late October, a particular shade of blue that was almost gray, cool and clear and capable of seeing a great distance. He was not cruel. That is the first and most important thing to understand about Patrick Maddox, because the word fierce is an easy word to misread. He was fierce the way a good fence is fierce, the way a reliable river is fierce, something that holds, something that protects, something that does not bend easily but does not break things needlessly either. He had inherited the ranch at 22 when his father died of a bad heart, and he had grown it in the 10 years since through discipline, fair dealing, and the kind of stubborn refusal to give up that people in that part of Texas called grit, and people everywhere else called something harder to name. He had also inherited his father's reputation for saying exactly what he meant, which people either respected deeply or found profoundly inconvenient, depending on which side of his meaning they happened to be standing on. He did not come into the mercantile looking for anything complicated. He came in for a new pair of work gloves and 20 pounds of salt. He found Lillian Holloway bent over Clara's ledger book at the counter, her dark hair pulled back, her brow furrowed with the particular concentration of someone who has found an error and is tracing it backward to its source with the patience of a hunter. You moved the April freight cost to the wrong column, she said without looking up, apparently addressing Clara, who was somewhere in the back. Clara's not back there, Patrick said. Lillian looked up. Something happened in that moment that neither of them could have explained adequately if pressed. It was not a thunderbolt or a fever. It was more like the moment when your eyes adjust in a dark room and you suddenly see the shape of everything that was already there. A recognition, quiet and a little unsettling, as if something inside each of them said, "Oh, there you are," before either of their minds had caught up to the meaning of it. "I apologize," Lillian said, and her voice was completely steady. "I thought she was in the stock room." "She stepped across to the church to drop off some donation cans," Patrick said. He set his list on the counter. "I am Patrick Maddox. I run the Maddox spread 12 miles north." "Lillian Holloway," she said. "I am helping with the books." He nodded. He did not look away as quickly as politeness might have suggested, but he was not rude about it either. He looked at her the way he looked at the horizon when he was trying to read the weather, attentively, without apology, looking for information. "You're not from here," he said. It was not a question. Kansas, she said, which was true, and she left it at that. He did not push. He picked up her notation of the misplaced freight cost and studied it. That error goes back 3 months, he said. Clara has been wondering why the books don't balance. I know, Lillian said. I found it on Friday. I am correcting the whole quarter. He set the paper down. She is lucky to have found you. Something flickered behind Lillian's eyes at that, a shadow of something complicated, but she smoothed it away quickly. I am the lucky one, she said. Clara came back then, the little bell above the door chiming, and the conversation rearranged itself into the ordinary business of a man buying gloves and salt. But as Patrick loaded his purchases into the bed of his wagon, he found himself glancing back at the mercantile window, where he could see the dark top of Lillian Holloway's head bent over her work again. He came back on Thursday, as he always did, and on the following Monday, and the Monday after that. Each visit was brief and entirely legitimate in its stated purpose. He needed thread for the bunkhouse. He needed lamp oil. He needed a specific kind of bolt that Clara had to order. What he also needed, though he was only slowly becoming willing to admit this to himself, was to hear Lillian Holloway say approximately 8 words in that calm, collected voice, and to see whether that shadow behind her eyes was still there, and whether it was getting darker or lighter. It was getting darker. By the 3rd week, he knew something was wrong. Not wrong with her character. Everything he had observed told him her character was solid, careful, and honest. Wrong in the sense that she was afraid of something, and that the thing she was afraid of was getting closer. He saw it in the way she positioned herself in the room with her back toward the wall. He saw it in the way her eyes moved to the window whenever she heard hoofbeats on the main street. He saw it in the way she kept her carpetbag within reach even at work, as if she might need to leave in 60 seconds without warning. He said nothing about any of this for 2 more weeks, which was, for Patrick Maddox, an extraordinary exercise in patience. What finally broke the silence was not something he said at all. It was something he saw. He came into the mercantile on a Tuesday, not his usual day, because one of his hands had needed a particular medicine from Dr. Prentice, and Patrick had driven him in. He was walking back past the mercantile when he saw, through the glass, a man inside the shop. A man who was not buying anything. A man who was standing too close to the counter and speaking in a low, deliberate way that Patrick recognized from a distance as the specific register of someone who is making a threat. Lillian was behind the counter, very still, her hands flat on the wood, her face composed into that careful, controlled blankness that Patrick had come to recognize as her armor. He was through the door in 4 steps. The man was perhaps 40, heavyset, with a thick mustache and the kind of eyes that calculated everything in terms of what it was worth to him. He wore a decent suit that was slightly too warm for the season, and he had the look of a man who traveled between towns with money and specific intentions. He turned when the door opened, and the false pleasantness that had been on his face when he thought he was alone with Lillian rearranged itself into something careful and surface level. "Just conducting some business," the man said. "The lady doesn't look like she's conducting business," Patrick said. "She looks like she'd like you to leave." The man's eyes moved between Patrick and Lillian. He made a quick, private calculation. Patrick Maddox was not someone that quick calculations usually ran in favor of challenging. "We'll continue this conversation another time," the man said to Lillian, as if Patrick were not there. "No," Patrick said. "You won't." The man left. The door chimed shut. In the silence that followed, Lillian's carefully maintained composure cracked. Just slightly, just for a moment, her breath came out too fast and her hands trembled once before she stilled them. Then she looked at Patrick and said, in a voice that was almost but not quite steady, "Thank you." "Who is he?" Patrick asked. "One you need to concern yourself with." "I just made him my concern," Patrick said, "so his name would be useful." She hesitated. The habit of secrecy was deep and well practiced, but there was something about Patrick Maddox's directness that made the usual deflections feel both pointless and a little exhausting. "His name is Warren Fitch," she said. He is connected to a man I used to work for in Wichita, a man named Douglas Crane. Patrick waited. He was very good at waiting. Douglas Crane runs a gambling house, Lillian said. I kept his books for 3 years. I was very good at it and he paid me well, and I was grateful at first because I had nothing when I arrived in Wichita. No family, no money. He seemed generous. She paused. He was not generous. He was investing in what he thought he owned. And what did he think he owned? Patrick asked, his voice quiet and very steady. Me, she said simply. My work, my silence. He had been skimming money from several business partners, dangerous men, and he had hidden it inside his own accounts in ways that I documented. I kept the records. When one of his partners began to suspect him, Crane told them I had done it, that I had embezzled. Her jaw tightened. I had done nothing of the sort. But I had the books and Crane had the influence and I had to run. So you ran to Kansas. I ran from Kansas, she corrected. I had already run to Kansas. I ran from Kansas to here. And Fitch works for Crane. Fitch works for Crane's partner now. The man Crane accused me to. His name is Beaumont Lyle, and he is the kind of man who does not forget a slight, whether the slight was real or invented. She met Patrick's eyes. He believes I stole from him. He wants the money back, or he wants to make an example. Mr. Fitch is here to tell me which it will be. Patrick was quiet for a moment. Outside, the main street of Caldwell went about its ordinary Tuesday business, completely unaware. Do you have the books? He asked. I do, she said. I took them when I left. They prove exactly what Crane did and exactly what I didn't do. But I can't go to the law in Wichita because Crane has connections there. And I don't know anyone here who would. I know the county sheriff, Patrick said. And I know a lawyer in San Antonio who is very good at this kind of document work. She stared at him. You don't owe me anything. No, he said. I don't. Then why? Because what's being done to you is wrong, he said. And because I know it's wrong, and I have the means to do something about it, and doing nothing when you know better is its own kind of betrayal. The words seemed to land on her strangely, because she blinked as if he had said something she had not expected. Most people in her experience had been very creative about finding reasons why something that was wrong was also, somehow, not their problem. I will need to think about it, she said. That's fair, Patrick said, and he picked up the lamp oil he had not been planning to buy, paid for it at the counter, and left. He came back the next morning. Yes, she said, before he had said anything at all. He sent the first letter to his lawyer in San Antonio that afternoon. What followed was 3 weeks of the strangest and most clarifying kind of alliance Lillian had ever experienced. Patrick did not hover. He did not make her feel like a charity case or a problem he was managing. He communicated through Clara when he had news from his lawyer, and when he came to the mercantile, he behaved with complete normalcy, as if helping her was simply one of the many sensible things he did in any given week. But in the quiet moments, when Clara stepped away, when the afternoon light came through the window at that particular angle that turns ordinary rooms golden, they talked. Not about her trouble, about other things, about the land, about books they had read, about the strange political weather of a country that was changing faster than its people could quite follow. She had opinions, and she stated them directly, and he listened and pushed back when he disagreed and conceded when she was right, which was with a frequency that surprised and then ceased to surprise him. He was falling in love with her. He knew it the way you know a season is changing, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small, irrefutable evidence. The way a morning in late September starts to smell different, and you realize one day that summer is completely gone. He did not say anything about it because she was in danger and because anything he said would come with the shadow of his position. He was a wealthy landowner and she was a woman with nothing and a man hunting her, and he was not going to add that particular complexity to what she already carried. What changed everything was Warren Fitch. Fitch had left Caldwell after the confrontation in the mercantile, but he came back. He came back on a Wednesday evening, and this time he did not come alone. He brought 2 men with him, hard-faced men with the look of hired muscle, and they went, not to the Mercantile, but to Mrs. Garrett's boarding house. Lillian was not there. She had stayed late at the Mercantile to finish a quarterly reconciliation, and it was Clara who found her after the boarding house incident and told her, shaking and pale, that those men had gone through Lillian's room and had taken her carpetbag. The carpetbag with the ledger books inside. Lillian felt the blood leave her face. Without those books, she had nothing. Without proof, she was exactly what Beaumont Lyle said she was, a thief who had run. She would have no defense, no recourse, no way to stop whatever came next. She was still standing in the middle of the Mercantile, working through the implications with a horrible, rapid clarity, when the door opened and Patrick walked in. He had come back into town for something, she did not ask what, and he read her face the moment he saw it. She told him. He was very still for a moment, then, how long ago? Clara found out perhaps 40 minutes past. They won't have gone far with it, he said. Not in the dark on roads they don't know. They will have stopped somewhere to look through it first to confirm they have what they wanted. He looked at Clara. Do you know any place between here and the main road north that a group of strangers would stop for the night? Calderon's Old Way Station, Clara said immediately. It's abandoned, but the roof is sound. Riders use it sometimes. Patrick nodded. He went to the door. Patrick, Lillian said. He stopped. She crossed the room and took his arm. The gesture was involuntary. Her hand simply moved to him the way a compass needle moves to north without conscious decision. Don't go alone, she said. I know those roads, he said, and I know how to handle 3 men who are trying to steal from a woman. That's not what I mean, she said. I mean, please be careful. He looked down at her hand on his arm. Then he looked at her face, and something in his expression shifted. Something that had been very controlled moved, just slightly, in the direction of undone. I will be back before midnight, he said. Lock this door. He came back at 11 o'clock. He had the carpetbag. He did not explain in great detail what had occurred at the way station, and Lillian did not press him on the particulars. What she understood from his brief account was that Fitch and his men had the books but had not yet damaged them, that Fitch was considerably humbled and was now several miles down the road toward the county line, and that Patrick's arrival had been a surprise of sufficient force to resolve the situation decisively. He set the carpetbag on the counter. She opened it and checked the books. They were intact, all 3 of them, with their careful columns and their incriminating numbers, exactly as she had recorded them. She stood there with her hands on the leather covers and felt something inside her that had been held rigid with terror for months slowly, carefully, begin to unknot. She looked up at him. He was watching her with that particular quality of attention he brought to important things, and his expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Thank you, she said, and her voice was not steady this time. Patrick, don't thank me, he said. Not for this. Why not? Because I didn't do it to be thanked, he said. The silence between them was different from all the previous silences. It had a weight and a warmth to it. Clara, bless her practical heart, found a reason to be in the back of the shop with considerable noise and thoroughness. I am not a safe person to know right now, Lillian said. Lyle will send someone else when Fitch reports back. I know, Patrick said, which means I am going to have to keep running, or I am going to have to find some other way to marry me, he said. She stopped. I am not saying that correctly, he said, and there was a roughness in his voice that she had never heard there before. I am saying, the lawyer in San Antonio believes he can use those books to bring charges against Crane and to clear your name with Lyle's people, but it will take time. Weeks, possibly more. And while it takes that time, you need a position that is not vulnerable. You need a name that comes with protection. My name comes with protection in this county. He paused. And I would like very much for you to have it for reasons that have nothing to do with Beaumont Lyle. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. You are serious, she said. I am always serious, he said, which was so completely true that she almost laughed. Patrick, she said carefully. I am a woman with borrowed trouble and no family and a past that I have not fully disclosed. I know, he said. You know the major parts of it, but not all of it. Then tell me the rest, he said simply. She did. She told him about the 2 years before Crane, the years she had spent as a waitress in a saloon in Abilene, which was not respectable but was honest. She told him about the brief and disastrous 6 months when she had been engaged to a man who turned out to have a wife already established in Missouri, and what that had done to her trust in her own judgment. She told him about the loneliness, the specific, grinding loneliness of a woman with no people and no place, moving from town to town with her skills and her pride as her only consistent possessions. He listened to all of it without flinching and without the particular careful neutrality that meant someone was recalibrating their opinion downward. "Now you know," she said. "Now I know," he said. "The answer to my question doesn't change based on any of it." She sat down on the stool behind the counter and pressed her hands flat on her knees and thought about it with every rational faculty she possessed, which were considerable. "If I say yes," she said, "I want to be useful, not kept. Not a burden on your household. You keep books better than anyone I've met," he said. "The ranch accounts are a disaster. Hector has been managing them for 20 years on the theory that approximate is close enough." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. "That is a compelling argument. I have more of them," he said. "I can make them at length if you prefer." This time she did laugh, and it was the first real laugh he had heard from her, unguarded and bright. He looked as if he had been given something he did not know he had been wanting. "Yes," she said. "My answer is yes." They were married 4 days later by a circuit preacher, who came through Caldwell on his regular schedule, and seemed entirely unsurprised to be called upon for an urgent ceremony. Clara Briggs served as witness and cried copiously and happily throughout. Hector Vance, who had driven in to collect Patrick and the new supplies, served as the second witness and stood with his hat in his hands and the dignified expression of a man who was extremely pleased, but felt that showing it too much would be undignified. And then Patrick Maddox gathered every man who worked his ranch into the bunkhouse and said the words that changed everything. "She has my name now. And every problem of hers becomes mine." Lillian stood on the other side of the door of the main house and heard every word through the wood, because the bunkhouse was adjacent, and the night was quiet and Patrick Maddox's voice carried. She stood with her hand on the rough-hewn door frame, and felt something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten what it was. Safe. Not because she was hidden or running or protected by distance, but because there was someone who had chosen to stand between her and the dark, not from obligation or calculation, but because he had decided thoroughly, with full information and in front of witnesses, that her life was his concern. She pressed her forehead against the cool wood and breathed. The first weeks at the Maddox Ranch were, in the practical sense, a period of rapid adjustment. The house was large by frontier standards, 4 rooms on the ground floor and 2 up, built from limestone and timber in the style that the German settlers had brought to the hill country, solid, functional, built to last. It needed work in the way that any house needs work when it has been run for 10 years by a man living alone, which is to say the curtains were inadequate, and the kitchen was organized according to a logic that defied interpretation. Lillian did not arrive and immediately rearrange everything. That was not her way. She arrived and observed and asked questions about what things were for and how they had been done, and then made suggestions, and if the suggestions were adopted, excellent, and if they were not, she filed the information and moved on. She also got her hands on the ranch accounts. Patrick had not been exaggerating. The ledgers were kept in a way that suggested Hector Vance had a perfectly accurate picture of the ranch's finances inside his own head, and had been transcribing only the parts he thought would be useful to look at later, which was not most of them. There were purchase receipts that had never been recorded, feed costs entered under 3 different headings, and a sale of 6 steers from the previous autumn that appeared to have been entirely forgotten. "Hector," she said, on her 4th morning, when she found him mending tack in the barn, "I need to ask you some questions about the September sale." Hector looked at her with the careful expression of a man deciding how to feel about this particular development. She met his gaze directly, and without challenge. $11 a head, he said after a moment. 6 head. The buyer was a man named Garza from Fredericksburg. Thank you, she said. And the payment cash or draft? Cash. Patrick put it in the box in the study. She nodded and made a note. Hector watched her write. You're going to find about 6 other things like that, he said. I already found 9, she said pleasantly. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. The relationship between Lillian and the ranch's foreman, that complicated, important relationship, shifted in that moment from wary parallel existence to something warmer. Hector had loved Patrick's father, and he had watched Patrick grow into the man he was with the particular pride of someone who had contributed to that growing. And his acceptance of Lillian, once granted, was complete and unwavering. He became, without fanfare or announcement, her ally in the particular way that practical, honorable men become allies, by simply treating her opinions as worth listening to and her presence as natural and right. The other hands took their cue from Hector, as they always had. Patrick watched all of this with the quiet satisfaction of someone seeing a pattern complete itself correctly. He and Lillian were learning each other in the particular way that people learn each other when they are starting from a middle place rather than a beginning. They had not courted slowly and grown accustomed in the usual order, and so they were doing the getting-to-know-you work simultaneously with the being-married work, which meant that some moments were warm and simple, and some moments were strange and a little raw, and all of them were honest. She discovered that he could not sleep past 5 in the morning regardless of how late he had gone to bed, and that he made coffee with a thoroughness that bordered on ceremony. He discovered that she read at night with a ferocity that suggested she was afraid books might run out, and that she had opinions about poetry that she delivered in the same measured, certain voice she used for everything else. She discovered that he was kind to animals in a way that was unstudied and completely automatic, and that the ranch dogs considered him their primary authority, but had already begun to test whether the new person in the house had biscuits. He discovered that when something made her genuinely happy, the happiness came out of her slowly, as if she was not quite sure she was allowed to have it, and then it broke through all at once and was extraordinary. He fell more deeply in love with her with every passing week, in the patient, certain way that he approached everything important. He did not rush her. He did not perform. He was simply himself, clearly and consistently, and he let her decide in her own time what that meant to her. The letter from San Antonio came in the 5th week of their marriage. Patrick's lawyer, a sharp and thorough man named Ezekiel Hartwell, had done his work with the ledger books and had done it well. The account of Crane's embezzlement was clear, documented, and corroborated by 2 of Crane's former business partners, who had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence to arrive. Beaumont Lyle, faced with proof that the woman he had been hunting was not his thief but rather his evidence, had withdrawn his claim against Lillian entirely and had redirected his very considerable anger toward Douglas Crane, where it belonged. The threat was over. Lillian's name, her original name, was clear. Patrick brought the letter to her in the study where she was working on the accounts. She read it twice slowly and then set it down on the desk with the same careful, deliberate movement she used for everything. He watched her. "It's over," she said. The words sounded like something she was testing the weight of. "It's over," he agreed. She looked at him. And here was the moment he had been braced for, the moment he had told himself to face squarely when it came, the moment when the reason she had said yes became unnecessary, and he would find out what she felt when the necessity was removed. "I owe you a very great deal," she said. "You owe me nothing," he said. "You have saved this ranch's accounting from a state that would have taken years to untangle on its own. We are more than even on practical terms." "That is not what I mean," she said. "And you know it." "Yes," he said, "I know it." She stood up from the desk. She crossed the room to where he stood in the doorway, and she looked up at him with those sharp green eyes that he had been reading slowly over weeks, learning their vocabulary. "I did not marry you only to be safe," she said. "I want you to know that. I was afraid, but I was not only afraid when I said yes. I said yes because she started again. I said yes because you were the first person in a very long time who looked at me and saw a person rather than an asset or a problem, and I had not quite realized how much I needed that until you did it. Lillian, he said. I am not finished, she said. I also said yes because you argued with me about Jefferson Davis in Clara's Mercantile with the complete certainty of a man who expects to be argued back with, and nobody had done that to me in years. And because you went out in the dark and got my books back and came home at 11 o'clock and handed them to me without making me feel like I should be grateful in any particular kind of way. And because she stopped again, and this time the pause was different, softer. Because when you look at me, I feel like the ground is steady, and I have not had steady ground in a very long time. He put his hand against her face, very carefully, as if she were something worth taking care of. She leaned into it, which was more voluntary than she had realized she was going to be. I love you, he said. I have been not saying it for 5 weeks because you had enough to deal with. I know you love me, she said. I have known it for 3 weeks. I was waiting to feel certain enough of my own heart to say it back. Are you certain now? I am certain now, she said. I love you, Patrick. He kissed her then, slow and sure, the way he did everything that mattered to him, and she kissed him back without any of the caution that had governed everything she had done for years, because here in this house, with this man, with the threat finally behind her and the ground finally steady, she found that she did not need it. The summer that followed was the kind of summer that people remember for decades. Not because anything catastrophic happened, but because happiness, when it is new and genuine and shared between two people who have earned it, has a particular quality of light. Lillian threw herself into the ranch with the energy of someone finally given a large project equal to her capabilities. The accounts, once properly reconstructed, revealed that the Maddox spread was in better financial shape than Patrick had realized, which gave him room to invest in improvements he had been deferring. She helped him think through those decisions not as an advisor keeping a respectful distance, but as a full partner, with opinions and questions and the specific skill of knowing which numbers to believe and which to interrogate. He included her in conversations with buyers, with the bank, with the men who came from Austin occasionally to discuss land prices and water rights. Not because it was expected. In 1882, it very much was not, but because her mind was one of the best he had encountered, and it would have been genuinely stupid to leave it unused. The ranch hands, after their initial period of adjustment, had collectively decided that Mrs. Maddox was both formidable and fair, and that these were the best qualities a person in her position could have. Cookie, the ancient and opinionated cook named Absalom who had been feeding the bunkhouse for 11 years, initially regarded her as a threat to his kitchen sovereignty, and then, once it became clear she had no intention of invading his kitchen sovereignty, relaxed into something approaching respect. Hector Vance, for his part, became her staunchest defender. When a cattle buyer from up north made a mildly condescending remark about the ranch's newly organized ledger system at a meeting, it was Hector who quietly informed the man that the ledger system had been designed by Mrs. Maddox, and that he was welcome to attempt to find an error in it if he had approximately 3 weeks and a mathematics degree from an Eastern university. The cattle buyer did not find an error. In September, a letter arrived from a cousin of Lillian's, her mother's sister's daughter, a woman named Margaret who had tracked her through a chain of forwarded correspondence and had written with the careful, hopeful tone of family reaching across a distance it is not sure will be welcomed. Lillian read the letter 3 times and then told Patrick about the cousin and the family she had thought was simply gone. "Right back," he said, without hesitation. "She's in Missouri," Lillian said. "Then write a longer letter," he said. "She did," Margaret wrote back. A correspondence began that gradually deepened, and in the following spring, Margaret and her husband made the journey to Caldwell, and Lillian stood on the front porch of the limestone house, and watched a wagon come up the long road and felt something she had not felt in years. The specific, irreplaceable warmth of someone you share blood with, someone who remembers the same kitchen, the same voice, the same particular quality of light in a lost place. Patrick watched her from the doorway and felt something so fierce and tender that he had to look away for a moment to compose himself. That autumn, she told him she was pregnant. She told him in the early morning before sunrise, when they were both still in that half-waking state where the defenses are down and everything is more honest. She said it quietly, carefully, as if she was still not quite sure how to hold the information herself. He sat up and looked at her, and the expression on his face was something she kept in the very center of her memory for the rest of her life. It was not complicated. It was simply pure joy, clear and complete, the expression of a man who has just been given something beyond what he had allowed himself to want. Are you well?" he managed. "I am well," she said. "I'm a little sick in the mornings and I am tired, but Dr. Prentice says I am healthy and everything seems as it should be." He lay back down and pulled her close and held her with the particular gentleness of someone handling something that has become infinitely precious, and she let herself be held because this, she had learned, was one of the things she was allowed now. "Boy or girl?" he murmured into her hair. "I have no idea," she said. "How would I possibly know that?" "I'm asking your preference," he said. She thought about it. "I think a boy first. Is that strange?" "No," he said. "Why?" "I grew up with a brother," she said. "My brother Thomas, he was a good person. I think I would like there to be someone like him again." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "Then a boy first," he said, "and then as many girls as you like after that." "You seem very confident about your ability to arrange these things," she said. "I am a very confident person," he said, and she felt his smile against her hair. The winter was mild that year, which the Cattleman took as a mercy because the previous 2 winters had been hard. The ranch settled into the particular peace of a cold-weather season, less urgency, more repair work, the rhythm slowing enough to allow for things like long evenings, by the fire and reading aloud to each other, and the kind of conversation that requires time and stillness to arrive at. It was in one of those evenings that Lillian told Patrick the last thing she had not told him. Not secrets, exactly more the deep interior landscape of a person, the private fears and private griefs that take a long time to feel safe enough to voice. She told him about what it had felt like to lose her entire family in a single summer, the specific horror of the silence that fell afterward. She told him about the shame she had carried about the years in Abilene, the way she had internalized other people's judgment of her choices, even when those choices had been the only ones available. She told him about the engagement that had turned out to be a fraud, the particular damage it had done to her ability to trust her own perception of people. He listened to all of it. He did not minimize it or try to fix it or tell her those things were in the past and she should let them go. He simply said when she was finished, "I'm glad you told me." "All of it," she said, "even the Abilene part." "All of it," he said. "Especially the Abilene part because it took you the most courage to say, and you should know that it didn't change a single thing about how I see you." She looked at the fire for a moment. "You are a very unusual man," she said. "I've been told," he said. "I mean it as a compliment," she said. "I know," he said. She leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The fire crackled. Outside, the Texas night was cold and full of stars, and somewhere in the bunkhouse, Absalom was probably still awake complaining to Hector about the inferior quality of the current flour shipment, and the dogs were asleep on the porch, and the cattle were safe in the winter pasture, and everything was, for this particular moment, completely and absolutely right. The baby came in June, on a day that started cool and turned blazingly hot by noon, which seemed to Lillian, in retrospect, an entirely appropriate entrance for this particular child. Dr. Prentice delivered him, with Clara Briggs present and helpful, and Patrick outside the door wearing a visible track in the floorboards of the hallway. He was healthy, red-faced, furiously loud, and indisputably a boy. When Dr. Prentice opened the door and reported this information to Patrick, who had been pacing for 7 hours, and had the wild-eyed look of a man who has put himself through a considerable emotional ordeal, Patrick stopped moving entirely for a long moment. Then he went in. Lillian was exhausted and radiant in the particular way of women who have just accomplished something enormous. The baby was in her arms, newly wrapped, still loudly expressing his displeasure with the general situation. Patrick sat on the edge of the bed and looked at them both, and the expression on his face was the same one Lillian had been collecting, that pure, undone, clear joy, bigger now than it had been even in the early morning when she had first told him she was pregnant. "Hello," she said to him. "Come meet your son." He held the baby with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who handles fragile things very seriously. The baby stopped yelling almost immediately, which made Lillian laugh. "He already knows you," she said. "Babies don't," Patrick started, in the voice of a man about to say something rational. "Don't," she said. "Just let it be what it is." He looked down at his son's face and decided, without much difficulty, to let it be what it was. They named him James Thomas Maddox, James for Patrick's father, Thomas for Lillian's brother, and from his very first weeks he proved to be a child of strong opinions and considerable volume, which surprised no one who had met either of his parents. Hector Vance, presented with the baby on the porch a week after the birth, held him with the solemnity of a man accepting a great responsibility, and then declared him a fine boy in the tone he reserved for significant judgments about cattle and horses and other things of genuine importance. The baby grabbed Hector's calloused finger and held on, and Hector, a 61-year-old man who had forded rivers and faced down stampedes and outlasted every difficulty the range had thrown at him, went slightly pink around the eyes. "You're going to spoil him," Lillian told Hector later. "I am going to teach him," Hector said with dignity. "Those are different things." "You're going to teach him and spoil him," Patrick said. Hector walked away, which was his standard response to arguments he had already lost. The following years at the Maddox Ranch were years of work and growth, and the kind of steady, deepening happiness that does not require dramatic events to sustain itself. The cattle business evolved as the railroad spread further, and Patrick adapted with the pragmatic flexibility that had always characterized his approach to the land: less open trail driving, more direct rail shipping, new arrangements with buyers in San Antonio and Dallas, a gradual shift toward improving the breed quality of the herd. Lillian's ledger skills became something of a quiet legend in the county. She was discreet about it, because she understood that the men who came to Patrick for business did not always know quite how to handle the fact that the woman across the table understood their accounts better than they did, and she preferred outcomes to recognition. But the outcomes were excellent and consistent, and Patrick, who was not discreet about his wife's abilities, made sure the right people knew who was responsible. When a neighboring rancher named Caldwell, no relation to the town, fell into financial difficulty because his own books had been badly managed, it was Lillian who quietly helped him reconstruct his records and identify where the damage was salvageable. And the man's gratitude was the kind that lasted because it was specific and real. 2 years after James Thomas arrived, a daughter was born. They named her Eleanor Margaret Eleanor, because Lillian had always loved the name. Margaret because the cousin who had become family deserved the honor. Eleanor was, from her first weeks, a child of extraordinary calm and bright, watchful eyes that seemed to be taking in and cataloging information at a rate that would have been alarming if it had not also been so obviously purposeful. "She watches everything," Patrick said, looking at her one evening. "She gets it from you," Lillian said. "I was going to say she gets it from you," he said. "Then she gets it from both of us," Lillian said. "She is doomed to be a thinker." Patrick looked at his daughter's small, serious face. "Seems like a good fate," he said. Lillian leaned against him. He put his arm around her. Eleanor looked at both of them with an expression of calm assessment that they would both recognize in 20 years as the expression she wore when making major decisions. James Thomas, at 2 years old, was unimpressed by his sister's arrival in the immediate term and very protective of her within the month, having apparently decided that she was his responsibility. This decision was endorsed by no one and ignored by him entirely. Clara Briggs became the closest thing to a grandmother that either child would have, arriving on Sundays with alarming amounts of baked goods and opinions about child-rearing that she delivered with the cheerful authority of a woman who has decided that being helpful is more important than being invited. Lillian adored her for it completely. Hector, as predicted, spoiled James Thomas comprehensively under the cover of teaching him, and was beginning to construct elaborate plans for doing the same with Alina when she was old enough. Plans that he refused to describe in detail because he claimed they were still in development. In the 5th year of their marriage, Patrick came home from a meeting in town with a complicated expression that Lillian had learned to read as, "There is a decision that needs to be made and I want your thinking before I make it." He sat down at the kitchen table and she poured coffee and sat across from him. "The Harlan parcel," he said, 300 acres on the creek, running north from our current fence line." "I know the parcel," she said. "The Harlan family is moving to California. They want to sell quickly. The price is below what the land is worth." He paused. "It would give us the water access I've been wanting for the North Pasture. It would be a sound investment. But it would mean taking on a mortgage, and the interest rate from the bank is higher than I'd like," she said. "Yes, I've been watching their rates." She looked at her coffee for a moment, running calculations. "If we structured the payment over 7 years rather than 5, the annual burden is manageable. The North Pasture access would increase the value of our summer grazing capacity by," she did a quick calculation in her head, "approximately 40%. It pays for itself in 4 years. He watched her. "Take the land," she said. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "You've wanted that creek access since before I got here. Hector has mentioned it 11 times in my presence and probably 300 times in yours. The numbers work. Take the land." He reached across the table and took her hand. "Every time," he said, "every single time I need to think something through, you are exactly the right person to think it through with." She turned her hand over and held his. "I feel the same way about you," she said, "which is a remarkable thing to be able to say about the person you married." He smiled. "Is it?" "You know it is," she said. "Most people don't get to say it. We are very lucky." "We are very good at this," he said. "I think that's different from luck." "Both," she said. "We are lucky and we are good at it. I refuse to choose." They bought the Harlan parcel. The creek access proved over the following years to be exactly as valuable as the calculation had suggested, possibly more so. The North Pasture thrived, the herd expanded, and the Maddox Ranch grew into one of the most consistently profitable operations in the region, not because Patrick was reckless or flashy, but because he was steady and sound, and married to someone who could read a financial situation the way other people read the weather. James Thomas, at 6 years old, began following Hector around the ranch with the devotion of a young person who has found their first real mentor. And Hector, who had privately been hoping for exactly this, taught him the way he had once taught Patrick, with patience and seriousness, and the deep respect of someone who believes that children deserve to be treated as the people they are becoming. Alina, at 4, had begun asking questions at a rate that was impressive even for a child of her parentage. She asked questions about everything: the cattle, the accounts, the stars, the way water moved in the creek, the names of plants, the history of the land they lived on. Lillian answered all of them directly and thoroughly, and when she did not know the answer, said so and then helped Alina find it. "She is going to be something extraordinary," Clara told Lillian, watching Alina dismantle a cotton reel with focused intensity, apparently to understand how it worked. "She already is," Lillian said. Clara looked at her friend because that was what they had become, quietly, through years of Tuesday deliveries and Sunday visits, and all the ordinary moments that accumulate into something irreplaceable, and said, "You are happy." "I am happy," Lillian said. She said it without qualification or shadow, the way she could not have said it 6 years ago, the way she had not been sure she would ever say it and mean it fully. "I am very, very happy, Clara." Clara patted her hand with the brisk affection of someone who refuses to be sentimental about being sentimental. "Good," she said. "You deserve it, you both do." In the 8th year of their marriage, a man arrived in Caldwell who knew Douglas Crane. He was not a threat. He was simply a man who had known Crane in Wichita and had heard, through some chain of acquaintance, that the woman who had brought Crane down was now a rancher's wife in Texas, and he came with information. Crane had finally been convicted, 18 months past, and was serving a prison sentence in Kansas. Beaumont Lyle, who had cooperated with the prosecution, had received a reduced judgment in his own separate legal matter, and had retired, apparently with fewer resources and considerably less fury than he had previously possessed. It was, in the plainest terms, completely and finally over. Lillian received this news in the study where she had been working when the man came to the door, and she listened to it with the thoughtful attention she gave to all information, and when he left, she sat for a long time with her hands in her lap. Patrick found her there an hour later. She looked up at him and her eyes were bright, not with grief but with something that took him a moment to identify correctly. The specific, enormous relief of someone who has been bracing for so long that they had stopped noticing the bracing, and who has only just realized when it releases how much weight they were carrying. "He's in prison," she said. "I heard," Patrick said. He had encountered the man on the road in and had been told the news. "I knew the legal case was strong," she said. "Ezekiel Hartwell told me it was strong, but knowing it's done that he can't, that there is no one left with a reason to come looking for me," she stopped. "It feels like something I had forgotten how to set down." He crossed the room and crouched in front of her chair so his eyes were level with hers. "You are safe," he said. "You have been safe, and you are even more thoroughly safe now." "I know," she said. "I know that." Here she pressed a hand to her chest in the way that feels real. He took her hands. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, and it was very different from the first time she had said it to him, in Clara's mercantile with a controlled voice and guarded eyes. This was full and deep, and it held everything in it: the borrowed horse, the bullet graze, the ledger books, the bunkhouse declaration, the years of steady ground, the children asleep upstairs, all of it. "Lillian," he said, his voice rough with something he did not bother to contain, "I would do it again. All of it. From the beginning. In any version of any world." She leaned her forehead against his. "So would I," she said, "although next time perhaps we could manage it slightly less dramatically." "Unlikely," he said, "given who we both are." She laughed, and he kissed her, and outside the window of the study, the Texas summer was going about its enormous, golden business. And on the porch the dogs were sleeping, and from somewhere near the barn they could hear Hector telling James Thomas, in very serious terms, the correct approach to reading horse temperament. And Alina's voice floated up from the garden below, where she was conducting some private investigation of the Rose situation with the focused intensity that would, in 40 years, make her the most respected botanist in the university where she would eventually teach. None of that was known yet, of course. What was known was this particular evening, this particular light, this particular life that had been built from difficult materials into something solid and warm and full. The third child arrived the following spring. A boy, as it happened, small and fierce-eyed from his first hour, with Patrick's jaw and Lillian's dark hair, and the specific quality of attention in his gaze that suggested he had arrived with opinions already formed, and was simply waiting for language to express them. They named him Robert for no particular historical reason, simply because when they looked at him, the name seemed to fit, and Hector pronounced him excellent, and James Thomas, at 8, received him with the grave seriousness of a boy who understood that a new brother was a significant addition to his responsibilities. And Alina, at 6, immediately decided she knew how to hold a baby better than everyone else in the room, and demonstrated this with considerable confidence. "She's going to run things," Patrick said, watching his daughter instruct the doctor on the proper angle for supporting an infant's head. "She already is," Lillian said. He looked at her over the heads of their children, and the look between them was the look of people who know each other completely. The specific, rare intimacy of two people who have been through difficulty together and come out the other side not diminished but deepened, not worn down but more themselves than they were before. He crossed the room to her side. She leaned against him. Eleanor was still explaining infant care to the room. James Thomas was examining his new brother with the critical eye of someone assessing a new hand for the ranch. Robert was asleep, indifferent to all of it. "3," Patrick said. "3," Lillian agreed. "The house is full," he said. "In the best possible way." "The best possible way," she agreed. Outside, the spring evening was doing what spring evenings in the Texas Hill Country do when they are being their best selves, turning the sky that particular shade of copper and rose, setting the creek to catching the light, making the air smell of cedar and new grass, and the specific, living promise of a season that believes in what it is doing. The Maddox Ranch sat under all of it, solid and well-tended, its limestone walls warm with the stored heat of the day, its fields organized with the particular competence of people who love the land they work and understand it deeply. The cattle in the south pasture moved in their slow, deliberate patterns. The horses in the paddock stood in the failing light with the peaceful patience of animals who trust the place they are kept. In the bunkhouse, Absalom was making something that smelled like cornbread, and Hector was probably telling someone something important whether they had asked for it or not, and the dogs were beginning their evening patrol of the porch with the professional dedication they brought to this work. And in the main house, the Maddox family was doing what they had been doing for years, quietly and without ceremony, being together, being real, being the particular kind of solid and warm and true thing that does not come from luck or from ease but from two people deciding, every day, in small ways and large ones, to build something worth having. Lillian thought sometimes about the woman who had arrived in Caldwell on a stolen horse with a bullet graze and a rehearsed lie and nothing else. That woman had believed, in the part of herself she did not examine very often, that the best she could hope for was to survive, to keep moving fast enough that the danger stayed behind her, to be useful enough to people that they did not ask her to leave. She had not dared to want this. She had not known this kind of life was available to her. She had not understood that a man could look at her full history, the saloon years and the fraud engagement and the gambling house books and all the running, and see not a liability but a person worth choosing. Patrick had looked at all of it and said, in the clearest and most direct possible way, "You are worth choosing. I choose you. Every problem of yours is mine." He had meant it, and the meaning had not diminished by a single degree over the years. If anything, it had grown larger, had expanded to include the children and the accounts and the land and the cousin in Missouri who came to visit every 2 years and brought her own children now, and Clara Briggs on Sundays, and Hector's unspoken pride, and the 10,000 small choices that made a life. She found him on the porch later that evening, after the children were in bed and the ranch was settling into its night quiet. He was standing with his hands on the railing, looking out at the dark land, and she came to stand beside him. They did not speak for a while. "They did not need to. Patrick," she said eventually, "you know what I was thinking about today? The creek easement," he said. "No, I was thinking about what you said in the bunkhouse, that first night." He turned to look at her. In the dark, his face was composed of shadows and the faint starlight, but she knew every plane of it as well as she knew her own ledgers, as well as she knew the sound of his boots on the floor in the early morning and the specific quality of his laugh and the way he held the children as if they were something that mattered beyond measure, because they were. "She has my name now," she quoted softly, "and every problem of hers becomes mine." "I meant it," he said. "I know," she said. "I know you did. I knew it then, even." She paused. "I want you to know that the same is true in the other direction. Your problems are mine. Your name is mine and mine is yours, and whatever comes, whatever the land brings, whatever the market does, whatever," she gestured at the enormous, dark horizon, "the world decides to throw at us, I am here. Fully here. Completely." He was quiet for a moment, and she knew he was feeling something large that he was deciding how to hold. "I know that," he said finally. "I have known it for years." "Good," she said. "I wanted to say it plainly." "You always say things plainly," he said. "I learned it from you," she said. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him, and they stood on the porch of the house they had made together and looked at the Texas night. The stars over the hill country in 1890 were the same stars that had been there when Lillian Holloway arrived in Caldwell on a stolen horse with everything she owned in a bag and terror she was refusing to show. The same stars that had been there when Patrick Maddox first looked up from a counter in Clara Briggs's mercantile and felt something quiet and undeniable rearrange itself in his chest. The same stars that had watched a declaration made in a bunkhouse, and a letter carried on a dark road, and a marriage built from honesty and courage, and the daily, unflashy choice to be the kind of people who make their promises real. They were still there, those stars. They would be there tomorrow, and for the years of tomorrows after, when James Thomas was old enough to run the North Pasture, and Alina was sending letters about her studies, and Robert was following Hector around the barn the way his brother had done a decade before. When Clara Briggs finally retired from the mercantile and lived out her remaining years with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has built something good. When Hector, on a cold December morning at the age of 73, died in his sleep with the peaceable expression of a man who had done everything he meant to do. All of that was still ahead, and all of it was survivable and navigable and worth having, because of the choice that had been made first in the mercantile, and then in the preacher's ceremony, and then in the bunkhouse, and then over and over again in 10,000 unrecorded moments that were the actual substance of a life. Patrick held his wife and she held him, and the night held them both, and the Maddox ranch breathed around them in the dark, alive and solid and real. A home built not from easy circumstances but from hard materials and true hands, and the knowledge stated once publicly to an audience of cowboys and foremen who would carry it in their memories for the rest of their working lives, that when a person gives another person their name and means it, they give them everything. She had his name. And every problem of hers had become his. And what no one in that bunkhouse could have fully predicted on that first fierce and certain night was that what would also become his entirely and permanently was her trust, and her mind, and her laughter, and her love, which was, in the end, the better part of the bargain by far.